Hello everybody, hope you're doing okay. Now the adidas Adizero line, I've realised I've got 6 different pairs of their shoes, from the adidas Adizero SL here, to the Adios 8, to the Boston 12, to the Takumi Sen 9, to the Adios Pro 3, and to the PrimeX. So I thought, having run now a total of bit over 500 miles in all these 6 shoes together, I feel I got a pretty good feel for each of these shoes now. Now, as you might know, I do like to feature a brick on the channel, and sadly there is one here that has to take the biscuit, as the Adidas SL, but it does actually get better. So I'll go through each shoe in turn, tell you how I use them, what are their good points and what are their bad points, perhaps to see if I can help you decide which ones to get and which ones perhaps to not bother with. So let's go back to the Adizero SL. I should point out that all of these shoes are in a UK 13.5, US 14, and I bought them all with my own money. No freebies here, unfortunately. That's probably how I like it in a way, so I can give you my true opinions. Be nice to obviously get sent some shoes, but then you've obviously got to review shoes that perhaps you wouldn't have perhaps bothered with either. Well, that's probably the case with this one actually. This is actually the cheapest of the Adizero line, and there's a saying I think I quite like: buy cheap, buy twice. And I think this is certainly the case with this one. I mean, in theory, this isn't too bad a shoe. It's only about 320 grams in my size, which is a lot lighter than, say, a Pegasus 39 or 40. Problem is, it's got this original light strike, which just feels a bit like a brick. And I did feel like I was crushing my toes a bit on the upper here, and it felt like as a result it was running about half a size too small, and with no real options to go up in half a sizes. This really wasn't an exciting shoe at all. But I've seen plenty of reports people have been getting on with it, and as a good daily trainer. So I think sometimes you need to take it with a pinch of salt what us YouTubers say, and make sure that those opinions are relevant to you. Sometimes I see shoe reviews by people wearing, say, a size 5 who are a woman, and I'm a size 13, 13 and a half and a man. And then, what I would feel in a shoe might be completely different to them. Even men with sort of size 9 feet, like the men of the run testers in the UK, it's all very interesting to see what they say. But again, their shoes are so much lighter than mine, and the experiences might be somewhat different. Equally, I'm very light for my height. I'm on a good day, I'm about 73 kilograms, although at the moment I've crept up to 75. But if you're sort of like someone like Andy Rayner, who's a bit more sort of muscular than me, shall we say, then perhaps his shoes sort of like need to have a slightly different tactic on things. So things definitely start to improve when we get to the Adios 8. This is what I'd perhaps call their sort of budget racer come lightweight everyday trainer. I mean, it's perhaps a bit light to do all your training in it, and I think these days with we have a tendency for people to want like high stack soft shoes for their daily training. This one is a bit of a throwback to an earlier day. So if you're like me that grew up with the Adios shoes, I raced a marathon in them in 2016 and did all my road races from a mile to the marathon, and a lot of track sessions and fast intervals as well. This is quite a shoe, like sort of like almost like a nostalgic shoe for me. I think it's getting a lot less attention, say the Boston 12 that we'll come to next. But for me, this is a lot lighter. This is only about 273 grams in my UK 13.5, which compares to the Boston 12, which is 340. It's a lot lower to the ground feeling shoe. You've got the Light Strike Pro at the front here, and it's all basically at the back it's Light Strike 2, which is a bit softer actually than the original Light Strike in the SL and shoes like that. So I think that's why I like this one more. It's a shoe that I've used for like long runs as well as like interval sessions. I've done a 40-mile run in it, and I've done a session on the road of 6 by sort of 1Ks, traditional type session. I found it was a shoe that was handy to have like for mixed terrain runs in the summer, because it's sort of quite light and it's quite breathable here with this mesh thing, and it fits my sort of narrow foot quite well, but it is equally not too narrow. So I think if you have a wider foot, then you would enjoy this one. But I think what you do feel this one is you do feel a bit of ground feel, and if you are a person that doesn't really like that or hasn't really ever worn a shoe like this, you may find that a bit of a surprise. So next up we've got the Boston 12, which for a lot of shoe tubers and influencers seems to be what is now called a super trainer. I never quite understood the logic of that, because I've got 3 shoes that I'll show you in a minute I find are far more super to this one, and I think I actually prefer the Adios 8 to this one as well, albeit for slightly different purposes. Now you might say this is like Adidas's all-rounder shoe, which is probably true, and I think it's, if you look at the specs, it's very, very similar specs to the Adios Pro 3, which we'll come on to later, but it is for me about 60 grams heavier, and it just feels like a lot more sort of clumpy, a lot less lively. It fits a lot wider on the front here, so I've actually had to cut the laces. So these laces here, I think when I showed my original video, I was sort of somewhere up here. So that's sort of saved me 2 grams there. But it's a shoe that I've done about 75 miles in now, and it's one that I'm always sort of like not that keen to put on my feet, but it does the job. But I just don't think it's that exciting. But I think on the other hand, if you just want to have like one or two shoes, you just want to have a racing shoe and like a daily trainer, which is sort of up tempo-ish, then this is not a bad one. It's got the Continental rubber on the back, and after 70, 75 miles, there's hardly really any wear there at all. But I mean, to be honest, you wouldn't really expect any wear in a shoe after that sort of length of time, would you? Next up is the Takumi Sen 9, which in a way might be my sort of favourite shoe. And it's quite a niche shoe because it's the lightest shoe of the lot, and it's also the narrowest of the lot by quite some distance. So for my narrow foot, this is like an ideal shoe. Having said that, I've had to cinch the laces down a fair bit there, so it certainly would accommodate a wider foot than mine out of the box. But it is a shoe that has a 33mm stack in the back, and it's about 6mm drop. So it's kind of like a modern take on a racing flat. It feels so much more cushioned in a way than the Adios 8, in terms of like the fact that when you wear the Adios 8, you feel a lot more low to the ground. When the Takumi Sen 9, although the stack is only a bit more, you do feel like you're sort of like bouncing off the ground a bit more, but in a sort of like a minimalist sort of way. So it is very much like a traditional racing flat with just a modern take on it. It's a shoe that I wore last Saturday for some intervals, and I actually covered 15 miles, so I got a bit carried away. So I was doing like 400-meter reps with a long warm up and obviously a very long warm down, and yeah, just enjoyed it. I did feel a bit of discomfort from my sort of Achilles and ankle afterwards, so I need to be a bit careful that you wear a shoe like this for too long, but it did the job and it was an enjoyable run for sure. Now the Adios Pro 3 here, I think this is really what you would call is the super shoe of the lot, because this is the legal marathon racer from the range. A shoe you see on the feet of someone like Nick Bester a lot of the time, and obviously a lot of the Adidas elite athletes, both male and female, set some few world records in this one for sure. It's a shoe that I really sort of quite like and perhaps warm to more, but I still feel it's not that fast a shoe compared to the Vaporflies for me. So it's a shoe that I've enjoyed for like training. In fact, it's of these 6, it's the shoe that I've actually worn the most. 175 miles I got in it now, with a long run up to about 14, 15 miles. I think I could actually take it longer, but if I'm going for a very long run, I just had some other shoes that I'd prefer to be taking. But I've also done some interval sessions in this, and I think it probably would tie with the Takumi Sen as being the fastest of the shoes. And finally, the sort of like the behemoth of shoes. This is the original PrimeX. They don't actually do the PrimeX Strong in my size, but for all accounts, the actual ride of it is kind of similar to the Strong version. I think people seem to like the Strong upper, so I'd be keen to sort of give that a try. Although the PrimeX 2 is now sort of starting to surface, but by all accounts, it's got a lot heavier. And it's still not clear whether it's coming in my size, so that could be a bit of a damp squid from Adidas, but maybe they're trying to position that as more of a sort of a trainer. I think the problem with this shoe is that a lot of people like looking to it as a racing shoe. For me, it is really, really heavy. It's about 380 grams in my UK 13.5, which means it's a really nice sort of cruisy shoe, but it does go fast, but you do realise that there's a lot more weight there. I mean, in comparison, my Vaporfly 1 and 3 are 250 grams, so that's an amazing amount of difference. But I have actually been up to about a 22-mile run in this one, and found it very handy last winter when I was training for Seville to do some sort of steady long runs, not sort of like marathon pace runs, but sort of runs Matt told me to sort of like not go too slowly, but not obviously go too flat out. And it's a shoe that I've actually used for a couple of interval sessions, and to be honest, it didn't do too bad compared to the Adios Pro 3. I just feel that this shoe might start to really sort of bite if you really were going for it over a marathon distance, for me anyway. But I think in smaller sizes, this shoe is a lot lighter. So again, as I was saying earlier, don't take what I say is gospel, because if you've got a more sort of average sized foot, should we say, then I think this shoe will be a lot lighter and perhaps a lot more sort of lively compared to the other Adidas shoes. Let's just go through some different use cases, and I'll give you my opinion on what I like most. So if you're doing a long run where you're not wanting to go too fast, but equally not too slowly, and you want to have maximum cushion, I think this PrimeX is great. Just need to be a bit careful. It is a bit wobbling. You just need to get used to that a bit. I wouldn't necessarily want to take this on too rough a surface. I have done a bit of off-roading in it. As you can see, it's got a bit muddy, but yeah, certainly not a shoe that you'd really want to take off-road if you have to. If I wanted to do a long run where I wanted to do a sort of mix of paces and didn't have too much weight on my feet, but yeah, still had plenty of cushioning, I think the Adios Pro 3 is a very good option. Now, I think the Adios 8 is a bit of a sort of a left field one, but if I was doing a bit of multi-terrain where I wanted to sort of pick up the pace, then I think this one is an excellent option. I did a 14-mile run a few weeks ago where I was sort of like cruising along about 7:30 on the road, and a few off-road sections got through nicely. I had to stop for a bit of nettles here and there, but it's a shoe that sort of makes you want to go fast. I think you just need to be a bit aware of the fact that it is not quite as sort of relatively cushioned as some of the other ones. So if you are doing an out and out road runs all the time in this, I think you might start to feel it. And I think I have noticed that the cushioning may be starting to go a bit already after I've only done about 70 miles, maybe a perception thing. And also found I thought it would be good like in the wet, but actually when I took it off road in the wet, I did slide a bit. So I think it is a shoe definitely is best to stick in on the roads. I mean, the Continental rubber here, it's quite a thin layer of rubber here, and you've got this sort of torsion system in the middle here rather than a plate. So it does give it a bit of stiffness, but also just it's a bit more sort of forgiving than Takumi Sen 9 in terms of like the actual fit of it. I think that's one big difference. Okay, for interval sessions on the road and maybe some buffed out trails, as Andy Forrester Dean, the runner, likes to say, well, I think the Takumi Sen 9 would be the obvious option there. It's a shoe that I've used for some sort of 5k work and also some sort of tempo work for 10k half marathon pace, and that's done very well actually. And it's also the shoe that perhaps feels the most liveliest when you're doing like a 400 meter rep. But perhaps if you're doing long intervals, you might want to actually go to the Adios Pro 3, which comes to my next choice. I think the next choice for intervals would obviously be the Adios Pro 3 if you wanted a bit more protection than the Takumi Sen 9 has. And also if you're using this as a marathon shoe, you may only have this. So I always recommend people do some training in their marathon shoes. I certainly don't agree with saving your shoe for race day. I mean, if you like a shoe, there's no reason why you can't buy a shoe twice. Most of our shoe tubers, be like on pain of death, we won't buy a shoe twice. But the Vaporflies, I've got 7 pairs of them. So if you do like a shoe, then certainly I should go back and doing that. And also for intervals, I've had a go in the Adios 8, and I think for shorter intervals, especially ones that if they're slightly on a trail, like old railways, I think it's an excellent shoe for that. And I think it's partly why throwback to the days when I used to use my Adios regular one, the Adios 1, on old railways like the Downs Link. If you know that one, it's quite apart from in the winter, it's quite a sort of a relatively firm but not a tarmac surface. So I think it's ideal that, and you've just got enough grip on the back there. Just need to be slightly careful when it's a bit muddy because it wasn't as good as I'd hoped for. Now, I wouldn't use the Boston 12 for intervals, basically because I've already shown you 3 shoes without even showing you the PrimeX that I haven't used for intervals. So in a sense, like, that's kind of the problem with the Boston 12 for me. Like, I've got so many shoes that I like better for the purpose than this one. So yeah, not one I'd recommend for intervals purely on the fact that I've got other options. And I have done interval sessions in the PrimeX, and they did pretty well, to be fair. So I certainly won't discount that one as well. But I do find this is better for like a long cruising shoe, to be honest. Okay, so what about easy runs? Well, in a way, none of these shoes aren't that great for easy runs. Probably the shoe that I use most for easy runs is the Boston 12, mainly because of the fact that I said that all the other shoes are more racy in terms of like being lighter and more sort of nimble for me. But I think this shoe in a smaller size, I'm sure, would be quite nice for easy runs. Maybe I haven't seen this shoe in its best light, but yeah, it's just a shoe that I really struggled with sometimes. I mean, some of the easy runs I've done have been fine. I've just felt a bit of like discomfort through the toes sometimes, almost the rods here almost like feeling quite stiff. So yeah, it's just a shoe that a lot of people are saying are super, but I'm really struggling with a bit in terms of like to use that description. I mean, I'm using it fine, but it's almost like I'm forcing myself to a certain extent. When I was out in Portugal, I did actually spend a week just basically running sort of all my runs in the Adios Pro 3, and in a way I felt quite guilty for doing so, because you kind of think I shouldn't be running an out-and-out racing shoe for that. But on the other hand, I wouldn't actually race in this shoe because I prefer the Vaporfly. So I kind of think, well, I might as well get on and use it. So I think certainly this is a good option if you don't mind sort of like doing easy runs in quite an expensive shoe. And I perhaps wouldn't use it for easy runs if you were going to race in it, because I think if you're doing all your runs in the same shoe, then you get no lift on race day. But because I won't be using this one, and I feel like I can. Now, you could obviously take the PrimeX out for an easy run as well, but you'd have to be careful where you were going, because the wobbly feeling of it can be a bit off-putting. And if you feel an easy run doesn't want to turn into an easy run, then go and wear the Adios 8. The problem with this shoe is that it's actually quite difficult to run easy in it, because it's sort of a shoe that you just feel wants to get going. It doesn't really like running slowly. easy. You can run in it slowly, and I did on those sort of 14-mile runs, but I felt like I was just wanting to sort of get up and go. So when I was sort of looking at a watch thinking, oh, I shouldn't really be running 7:30 pace on this run, I should be more like 8 minutes. But it's kind of nice in a way sometimes to actually look at your watch and find you're going faster than you are. But you just have to be aware there's not so much cushioning in this one. So what shoe do I think is best for narrow-footed runners, and what shoe do I think is best for wide-footed runners? Well, certainly there's no contest on the narrow-fronted shoe. I think the Takumi Sen wins there quite easily. I think all the other ones, actually, bar the Boston 12 and the SL, I do find that I could get a nice enough lockdown. So I found the Adios 8 quite a good compromise, actually. It feels quite sort of like wider when you first get them, but having cinched the laces down in this very sort of minimal mesh upper, I feel like I'm sort of got a quite nice fit there. Boston 12 I do find is the widest of the lot. I mean, if you compare the outsoles there of the Takumi Sen 9, which is that one I'm flashing up there, to the Boston 12, you can see how much wider the Boston 12 is. And as a result, I think I'm having to cinch down the laces a lot there, and I'm then making it sort of quite tight at the back for me. I think it's partly why I'm struggling with this shoe, because I'm having to tighten the laces so much there that it's not actually that comfortable then around here, because I'm getting quite a lot of tension. Maybe that's why I'm getting these ankle problems at the moment. But if you're a slightly wider footed person, then this is definitely the one to go for. I think I actually do a wide version of this full stop, so if you've got very wide feet, then I think that may be the option to go to. Having said that, I did find the Adios Pro 3 needed quite a lot of work on the laces. I've had to sort of tie them in quite a lot, and they still come undone a bit. It's almost like a shoe that is really struggling to have like a proper lockdown. I think they're trying so hard to save weight here. They've really sort of taken out everything here, and there's like no padding at all in the tongue, which makes it very hard to sort of like get the right lockdown, because if you do the laces tight, then you got some tension here. It's nice to have a paper thin tongue in terms of like keeping it light and racy, but sometimes you just feel like you just want a bit more there to sort of help dial it in. In terms of what shoe is wearing the most, well, the most I've worn in any of these is 174 miles in the Adios Pro 3. I'll put up the mileages. I've done 121 in the PrimeX. I've done 45 in the Takumi Sen 9. Done about 73 in the Boston 12 and 69 in the Adios 8, and the SL, I have to bring that one up again. It's the only one that doesn't have a Continental outsole. It looks a bit like Continental, but it isn't. I've done 33 miles in this one, really, because I felt like I ought to, but a bit more than 20 miles, but yeah, maybe I don't think I'll be wearing this one again. Just don't like it, really. So what was my favourite? Well, it's perhaps easy to start with which is my least favourite. And my least favourite by quite a long distance is the SL. And then my least favourite next is the Boston 12. And I think next, the favourite comes to what kind of run you're doing. I think in terms of an all-round shoe for like different purposes, like long runs, different paces, intervals, perhaps the Adios Pro 3 is my favourite in that sense. In terms of how it kind of fits me, I would say the Takumi Sen 9 is probably better. But when I've done some testing between the Adios Pro 3 and the Takumi Sen 9, I don't think there's too much in it in terms of speed. If you're doing a very, very short sort of interval session very fast, then you can perhaps get up to acceleration quicker in the Takumi Sen 9. But I think the problem with a shoe like this is that the Adios Pro 3 being a bit more cushioned over time, any sort of like feeling of like getting off the gun quickly kind of goes by the fact you've got more like comfort with a bit more stack. In some ways, I think I like the Adios 8, but more for nostalgic reasons. I think having worn it a bit, I was kind of thinking, oh, this is a great shoe, but after a few runs, when you do feel the road a bit, you're kind of thinking, well, perhaps I'm a bit too sort of masochistic and keep wearing this shoe. But yeah, as I said, I think it's perhaps a shoe that perhaps I'd be better off in sort of like buffed out trails with only a bit of road on it. But it's a very nice option to have for sure. And the PrimeX is probably the most fun shoe of the lot. I wouldn't say it's necessarily my favourite, and because it's so heavy, and you really got to be quite careful where you go. So you have to be sort of think ahead of, in a way. But it's the shoe I've done the longest run in, so that in its sense is a vote for it in itself, isn't it? In terms of what each of the different shoes compare to, well, I think the Boston 12 to me is like the sort of equivalent of the Speed 3, which I think it wins hands down for me. The Speed 3 is about 60 grams lighter, just feels a lot more lively on foot, and I found the Speed 3 better for actually easy runs because it is lighter, and I prefer the sort of the sponge in that one. Takumi Sen 9, I guess you would put up against the Street Fly of the sort of like the lightweight sort of 5k shoes I've got. A lot of those shoes don't really come in my size, so the only one I've got to compare with is the Street Fly. I think I actually would probably prefer this one, actually. The Street Fly is lighter, but it's not quite what people thought, is it, the Street Fly? And it's a shoe that I've kind of wished I should have run more in, but haven't. I think I've already run more in the Sen 9 than this one. I think I've just got a bit more protection. the Street Fly is a shoe that you just feel like it should be good, but to me it just feels a bit sort of too sort of spread out and a bit too sort of like soft in a way, which is a bit odd for such a light shoe. But yeah, I think I have to go with the Sen 9 over the Street Fly. In terms of the out and out legal carbon race shoes, well, the Adios Pro 3 I quite like it, but to me it's not up there with the Vaporfly 1. I've done all my marathons in it. I'm still kind of decided whether I prefer the Vaporfly 1 or the Vaporfly 3. I still think I'm going to edge back to the Vaporfly 1 largely because it fits me better. Having said that, this sort of like, it does fit me quite well. It's just a bit heavier. I think Andy FOD Runner said the same thing. We got the same size. This shoe for us is just too heavier compared to the Vaporflies by about 30-40 grams. Doesn't sound much, but that's a lot more to carry around in a race, isn't it? I haven't really got an equivalent of the PrimeX. I suppose like the Super Comp Trainer from New Balance might be one. I'm not really that keen on that one. I think I didn't really get on well with Fuel Cell. And I think there's only so many sort of like super stacked sort of heavy shoes that I want to have, and I think this one does me well. So I think this one is quite unique, and I think that's why it's sort of quite a nice one to have, because it does give you a different option to all the other shoes I've got. Adios 8, now it's actually quite a difficult one to compare because there isn't really too many other shoes like it, because sort of like traditional racing flats aren't really done now by a lot of companies. I mean, Nike stopped doing the regular Streak a long time ago, and I guess that you would have to put this up against the Streak Fly as well. And I guess purely for nostalgic reasons, I think again I sort of prefer this one to the Streak Fly. Although I think having all three options are good, because obviously the Streak Fly is the lightest, but I think this one is a shoe, well, perhaps because it's black and it's got a black outsole, that I'd rather be taking off-road, whereas the Streak Fly, I don't think it would do so well there. But yeah, I mean, again, it's a shoe that, as I said, it's difficult to compare with, but I think if you compare it with the Streak Fly, I think I would prefer this one, but for slightly different use cases maybe. And the SL, well, unfortunately I have to compare it with the Zoom Fly 3, which is the worst brick ever. Zoom Fly 5 was pretty much of a brick, but perhaps a bit better. But yeah, this one is lighter though than those two for quite a long way. But yeah, just I don't know, it's just the light strike. I think it's just a budget shoe, and I think you pay for what you get here, which isn't an awful lot. But as I said, I've only paid £70 for this, so I haven't lost too much, have I? So I hope you like this little look at the adidas Adizero range. Have you got any of these shoes? Which ones do you like the most? Do you prefer the Adidas shoes to any other brands, especially for racing? Please let me know in the comments. And I hope you found this interesting. Like and subscribe, and see you in the next one then. Bye!